and I'm going to simplify this a little bit. So we're going to go through the steps very quickly. We already have the given problem written, so I don't need to do that. I'm going to take the square root of both sides. So that's the square root of x squared. And when I do that, I have a plus or minus on the other side, the square root of 4. And the square root and the square cancels each other out. So now I have x equals plus or minus 2. We already did b up above as well. So let's move on to c. We're going to take the square root of both sides. When I do that, I have a plus or minus sign in front of the square root. The square root and the square cancel. And so I'm left with x on the left, and I'm left with positive and negative 7 on the right. Part D, I'm going to take the square root of both sides. When I do that, I have a plus or minus sign in front of the square root sign. The square root and the square cancels each other out, so I'm left with x equals positive and negative 4. All right. More importantly, we need to get to part 2, where it has a fraction. So with this, you shouldn't type the fraction into your calculator. Just use your brain. We're going to take the square root of both sides like we have been. And we have a plus or minus sign in front, and the square root of 64 over 81. So when you have a fraction underneath the square root, remember that number is called the radicand. You just separate the radicand and take the square root of each one. What I'm saying is, on the left, these cancel and we're left with x. And on the right, I have a plus or minus, and I'm going to do separately the square root of 64, and I'm going to do the square root of 81. So my answers are positive and negative 8 over 9. So when you have a fraction, just take the square root of the numerator and then take the square root of the denominator. Part B, in order to do this one without a calculator, we have to change 30 1/4 to an improper fraction. So 30 1/4 is going to be 30 times 4, so that's 120, plus 1 is 121. So this problem, as an improper fraction, is 121 over 4. So I'm going to take the square root of both sides now, the square root of x squared, and on the other side I have a plus or minus sign, and I'm going to do the square root of 121 over 4. So the square root and the square cancel. I'm left with x equals, and then I'm going to do the square root of 121 on top, and I'm going to do the square root of 4 on bottom. So I have a plus or minus in front. The square root of 121 is 11, and the square root of 4 is 2. And that's my answer. Now, if I go back, remember that digits will require me to put a comma between the two numbers. So in digits, back up here, I would say x equals 2 or negative 2. For C, it would be x equals 7, comma, negative 7. D is x equals 4, comma, negative 4. Down here for part 2, x equals 8/9, comma, negative 8/9. And then this one would be x equals 11 over 2, comma, negative 11 over 2. So realize how you're going to have to put that into your digits homework. Okay, let's fix part 3 a little bit. Let's do the area of a square painting is 1,200 square inches. And I want to find the length of one side. So if you could change those things on your paper, make it a square painting that is 1,200 square inches. We want to find the length of one side. So we're dealing with a square, and the area, which is the inside of it, is 1,200 square inches. So to find the area of a square, we would take the side times itself. So that means x squared. X times x is x squared. So x squared equals 1,200. I want to take the square root of both sides. So take the square root of x squared. And when I take the square root of the other side, we have a plus or minus sign. Now, here's a little difference though. We are finding the length. And lengths can't be negative, so I do not need that plus or minus sign in front there. Now, 1,200 is not a perfect square, so I'm going to grab my calculator to do that. The x squared, the square cancels with the square root, so I'm left with just x there. And I would type into my calculator the square root of 1,200. So let's go ahead and round it to the nearest tenth. So it would be 34.6 inches on each side, approximately. So these squiggles mean it's approximately equal to 34.6 inches. So the extension is how much wood would we need to frame the painting. So if the painting is about 34.6 inches on each side, to put a frame around it, I would need to find the perimeter. And the perimeter is one side times 4, because there are 4 equal sides. So it would be approximately 34.6 times 4. And that gives us 138.4 inches that we need of wood. Now that's an approximation, so I'm going to put the squiggles there, okay, because it was about 34.6. So I would go ahead and say that we needed about 140 inches of wood if I were to go buy it. And that summarizes topic 3.1.